power. All right. Good morning. Welcome to Sabbath School. We're glad you're here. Shabbat Shalom. And to those of you following along online, we're glad you're here too. Hello, Jim and Dottie. Rita had two interesting books made recently, one about our 2023 trip to Wyoming and one about this year's trip to Wyoming. And Jim and Dottie and Rita and I are on the cover of the 2023 one. So welcome everybody. We're glad you're here. I'm not going to make any more comments because we have a lot of material to go through today, and it's important stuff. We're getting down to the very end of things, so we've got to go on with it. So let's have a word of prayer, and then we're going to start. Father in heaven, thank you for the Sabbath. Thank you for each one here. As we open your word, please give us wisdom and understanding that we might understand and put into practice the things that we read herein. And be with us as we study, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. I need 7 readers today, and I understand that Matt is the person with the microphone. All right, Matt has the microphone, and we're not even going to look at anybody on this side of the congregation. All right, I need a reader. I need 7 readers today in all to get through the whole chapter, but I need a reader to get us started. And this time, I'm going to interrupt as we go through it. So, all right, Glenn, you're going to start with Mark 14, and you're going to read verses 1 through 11, except that after you read verse 1, I'm going to stop you, and I'm going to stop you often. But anyways, go ahead and get started.
All right, Mark 14. Now the Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him.
Okay. What day of the week is this happening?
2 days, so Wednesday?
Wednesday. Jesus was crucified on Friday, the Passover. So this is happening on Wednesday. It's interesting, the Bible doesn't mention anything else going on Wednesday except for this. The chief priests, the teachers of the law, are looking for ways to arrest and kill Jesus on Wednesday of crucifixion week. But then read verse 2, please.
But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot.
Well, yeah, they know that Jesus has quite a following, and they're afraid to do it during the Passover for fear of what might happen. Well, now I have to look this way. We have one person on this side. Anyways, then Mark does something interesting. He goes back several days because what follows is what I call the feast. And the feast is one of the most interesting stories in the New Testament, in the Gospels, because it's one of 2 that I can think of, events that all 4 gospel writers talk about. Only 2 of them mention his birth, and about 2 or 3 mention his baptism. But this is one story that all 4 mention, this and the crucifixion and the resurrection. Everybody mentions this one, which is interesting. And it's got some important things, and we've got to look at all 4 Gospels to really get the picture. But get us started with the feast, please.
While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper.
Okay, hold on. Whose home is this in?
Simon the leper.
Simon the leper. Lepers were not allowed to have homes. Lepers had to live outside of the village, outside of the wall. They could not even live in their own home if they had one. So how can this be Simon a leper? And there's people there. We don't know. The Bible doesn't answer it. But my best guess is that Simon had been a leper. Jesus had cleansed him of his leprosy. So now, in thanksgiving to Jesus, he has this feast, and Jesus is the honored guest. I don't know. That's just the way I'm going to guess it happened. But knowing that Simon's a leper, he could not have been in his own home unless he had been cured of leprosy. And there was no cure for leprosy except Jesus. And what's interesting is John, in his version of the feast, he tells us that the man who put on the feast was a Pharisee. Simon apparently had been a leper. Simon was also a Pharisee. This feast took place on Sabbath evening, 6 days before the crucifixion. And so here we have Simon, a former leper, a Pharisee, inviting Jesus to be there. And John also is the only gospel that tells us that Lazarus was also at the feast. And so was Martha, and so was Mary. He mentions all three by name. The other three gospels don't mention any of them by name. So apparently, this feast is done to honor Simon, who's been cleansed of leprosy, and also to honor Lazarus, who has recently been raised from the dead. Martha's serving, and we're going to read about Mary in just a moment. Okay, so that's the background for it. Keep reading now, please.
A woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head.
Okay, we got two things to straighten out there. Very expensive perfume, pure nard. Nard was a perfume made from the drops squeezed out of the root of a plant that grew high in the Himalaya mountains. So somebody has to climb up the Himalaya mountains, gather a few of these little roots, squeeze a little drop of this perfume out. How much did it cost? We're going to read that in a moment, but you already know the answer. How much did it cost? So last night, I had Rita look up how much is the average year's wages for somebody living in this area today. $51,179. How many of you at home have a bottle of perfume that cost you $51,179? I don't see any hands. $51,179. That's one expensive jar of perfume. Wow. And Mark then says she poured the perfume on his head. Well, Matthew says the same thing. She poured it on his head. Luke and John say that she poured it on his feet. Well, which was it, his head or his feet? Probably both. Again, the Bible doesn't explain it, but I'm going to guess it was both. And depending on where a disciple was sitting, he would be able to see Jesus' head or his feet. And if indeed she did both, some could see one, some could see the other. In Mark's case, he emphasizes that she poured the perfume on his head. How much did this jar of perfume cost? $51,179. Okay, keep reading, please.
Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly.
Okay, it could have been sold for more than a year's wages. I just told you a year's wages today is $51,179. So this jar of perfume could have been sold for more than that. This is a tremendous amount of money. Are we surprised that they're saying, what a waste? $51,179 jar of perfume. And they knew the smell of pure nard, even though they'd probably never used it in their life. But they knew this was a very expensive jar of perfume. And it's interesting that they say, why this waste?
What's interesting also is that their mindset is, in all the time they've been with Jesus, has still not changed.
No?
From this moment and every moment as we continue to read, I was perplexed. I'm like, at what point? Because I said this.
When do they catch on?
Yeah, I've been doing the same thing over and over again for weeks right now in my job, and I've been doing it with other people, and I listen to these other people constantly ask the same question over and over again that's been answered, and in my reading I'm going, at what point do you catch on?
Yep. All right. So why are we wasting perfume on Jesus? Doesn't say much for their love of Jesus, but does say something for their recognition of the value of the perfume. All right, and they rebuked her harshly. Keep that in mind. Look at Jesus' response. Go on.
Leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could.
Now hang on, that last sentence. What did she do? She did what she could. And I'll tell you right now, folks, that's all God ever asks of any of us, is to do what we can. Would it bother anyone here to get up front and preach a sermon? I guess everybody's ready to get up front and preach a sermon.
Well, your question, you said, would it bother anybody to come up front and preach a sermon? I think that it depends on the person, because I know a few people that would definitely want to stay in the background.
Yeah, and that's my point.
Yeah.
There are things that some of us can do, and others would freak out in horror at the very thought of doing something like that. Jesus asks us to do what we can. She did what she could. She didn't do more than she could. She did what she could. I think that's incredibly important when we think of our relationship with Jesus. Jesus wants us to do what we can. And he said it in so many words. Keep going, please.
Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her.
And today, we're fulfilling those words. Jesus said, wherever the gospel is preached, this story would be told. And today, again, we're looking at this story. Again, we're going through it just as he said we would. Keep going, please.
Bill, if I may add, though, what I think is kind of interesting, at least in Mark, and I didn't check it, but she's not named.
No.
It's her actions that are being described. She's not getting any particular glory or kudos other than sharing an action.
And there are those who say, remember, Mark was the first gospel written. And then Matthew and Luke were written shortly after Mark was. John, which we're going to study next quarter, was not written until 96 AD. John is the very last book of the New Testament written. Actually, John wrote the book of Revelation, 95 AD, then he wrote the Gospel of John in 96, and then he died. So the very last thing John wrote was his gospel. Mark's the first gospel written, John was the last gospel written. And I've heard scholars say They believe that John's the only one that named the people there, like Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, because by then they were dead. And he felt comfortable mentioning them. But they were very much alive when Mark wrote his gospel, so not wanting to cause anyone embarrassment, he doesn't even mention their names. All right, go ahead and finish it up, please.
Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over.
How much money does it say they gave him here?
Doesn't give him a...
Doesn't give him out.
No.
It just says they promised to give him money. Interesting. Who was Judas? One of the disciples, one of the 12. When Jesus sent out the 12, did he send out Judas? Sure. And what did they do? They healed people, they cleansed lepers, they did all these wonderful things. Judas was one of them. And now he decides he can make a little money by betraying Jesus. Well, we're going to read some more about, go ahead, Joy.
Anyway, I don't know who or when I heard it, but I had heard in time past a preacher say that he did a sermon on him and said that Judas actually, I better not say a preacher sermon because I'm not sure that's where it came from, but anyway, Judas actually thought he was forcing Jesus' hand in taking and becoming the king.
And that's one of the theories behind that. Maybe by doing this, he thought Jesus will exert his power and force the issue, which Judas maybe thought Jesus was being slow about. That is a possibility. Bible doesn't say one way or another, but that certainly is a possibility. All right, so he's decided to betray Jesus and Ron.
I was just thinking that, what did they expect if he did do that? Did they expect to live forever from that point on? I mean, it's like he must have taught, well, from the very beginning, he taught about living forever. So I don't understand what they would have, thought about putting him in charge at that point. They would still die,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Yes, indeed. All right, need another reader. Matt, so find another person to read the next section. Okay, this will be verses 12 through 26. And again, I'll interrupt you often, but go ahead.
All right. On Thursday, the day of the Passover, lamb was to be sacrificed. The disciples asked Jesus, "We need to prepare the Passover supper as all our people do."
And that is true, because the Passover lamb would be slain the night before Passover. And that's what it's saying here. Thursday night, and they're going to slay the Passover lamb in preparation for the Passover. All right, go ahead, please.
But where do you want us to eat it? Then Jesus called 2 disciples from the group and said to them, "Go back to Jerusalem, and just as you get inside the city limits, you'll see a man carrying a large water pot on his head. Follow him. Go into the same house that he does and find the owner. Say to him, 'Our master would like to eat and the Passover supper with his disciples in your spare room.' Then he showed Then he showed you a large upper room were furnished with and prepared for us.
Okay. And I have a picture. I looked for it some time ago, couldn't find it. I didn't look for it last night because I figured I wouldn't find it. But I have a photograph somewhere at home of this room. They believe it's the actual room where the Lord's Supper took place. It's a large room on the second floor of the house. Most houses did not have 2 stories. Most houses were 1-story houses and with a flat roof, and they used the flat roof area as an extra bedroom or whatever. But this house actually has 2 full stories. The second story, you've got this large room. Now, knowing as we do that ancient things get buried in dust over the centuries, the first floor was completely buried. Now, the second floor is like the first floor there in Jerusalem, a large room. The belief is that this room, this house, belonged to Mark's mother. And if that's true, they're having the Last Supper in Mark's mother's upper room. But notice that it says that the room was already, what did it say? He will show you a large upper room furnished and ready. Wow. Wow. And that's in Jerusalem that this is going to take place. Okay, please, brother, read from there.
Thank him and make the others prepare and make preparations needed for the evening. The 2 disciples left and went into the town, where they saw the man carrying a large ceramic water pot on his head. They followed him, and everything else took place just as Jesus had told them. Then they made all the necessary preparations. That evening, Jesus came into the town with the rest of his disciples. When they sat down to eat, Jesus said, "One of our group eating with us tonight will betray me."
Okay, hold up right there. What night is this happening?
It must be Thursday.
Thursday night. Today we call it Maundy Thursday, the night that Jesus did the Last Supper. It happened on a Thursday night. What's going to happen the next day?
This came as a shock to them, and one by one, they said, "You're not talking about me, are you, Master?" He answered, "It is the one who keeps dipping his bread into the bowl when I do. The Son of Man will soon die, just as the Scriptures say. But I feel sorry for this man who is going to betray me. It would have been better for him if he had never been born than to grow up to do this."
And that pretty much answers what we said before about Judas maybe trying to force Jesus' hand. Now Jesus says it'd be better if he had never been born. Keep going, please.
When they were ready to eat, Jesus took the bread and blessed it. Then he broke it and passed it to his disciples, saying, "Take some of this bread, eat as a symbol of my body." Then he took the cup of unfermented wine, giving thanks, and passing it to his disciples to drink, for which they did. Jesus said, "The pure juice which you are just drinking represents my blood, that I will shed for the sins of the world. This will fulfill the covenant my Father and I made from the beginning, and I will not drink the fruit of this vine again until we sit down to eat together in God's kingdom."
Okay, hold
Then
up.
they sang a song and left for the Mount of Olives.
Okay. I've told this story before, but this is where it's very appropriate. I was preaching on this passage in Bellefontaine, Ohio. In those days, Ida Gresner often came to services. Ida Gresner was a Jew, but there was no synagogue nearby. So she would often come to services at our church on Sabbath. So Ida's there that day, and I'm presenting this, but I'm also presenting it the way it actually happened. There were 4 cups that were passed as part of the Passover meal. This is in between the second and third one. They passed the second cup. He's got it in his hand, and he's got the bread in the other hand. But there was something they were supposed to eat in between the second cup and the bread. Want to hazard a guess as to what they were supposed to eat in between those? The Passover lamb was supposed to come in between those. Now, I'm telling this to the congregation. And I said, Jesus sat there with the cup in one hand, the bread in the other. But something was supposed to come in between there. And I kid you not, it was Ida Gresner herself, a Jewish lady, who spoke up and said, because he was the lamb. I thought, wow. Members sitting there missed the point completely. But she, a Jew, understood it because he was the lamb. So there was the juice, there was the lamb, there was the bread. Everything was in its proper order. Okay. So they did the communion service. We still do it to this day. Today we use little tiny bits of unleavened bread, tiny little bits, a little tiny glass of juice. But anyways, and they sang a hymn, went out to the Mount of Olives. Remember that. That's going to become important with the next one. Okay, need another reader, please, Matt. This will be a short one. This will be verses 27 through 31.
No, I'm still perplexed though, Al, when he says it's the person who's dipping every time I dip with the bread, and nobody
Catches it.
It just it's over their head. And as you read that, I'm trying to define again. Do these guys pay attention at all?
Apparently not. Good point. Apparently not, because they don't get it still. No idea. You're right, right over their heads. Okay, somebody read 27 through 31, please. Brother Doug.
You will all fall away, Jesus told them, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter declared, even if all fall away, I will not.
Now, Peter says that. Keep going, please.
Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the others said the same.
So it isn't just Peter. Big Mouth Peter's leading the way, but they all feel the same way. We're never going to deny you. We're going to stay with you even if we have to die. And they meant it. They weren't right, but they meant it. All right, another reader, please, Matt. This will be verses 32 through 42. And here I'll make a lot of interruptions.
And they came to a place which was named Gethsemane, And he said to his disciples, Sit ye here while I shall pray.
Okay, Gethsemane. What does that word mean? Gethsemane is a common word in Hebrew in the time of Jesus. Literally, what does Gethsemane mean? It means oil press. Where is this located? Where are they? On the Mount of Olives. If you have olive trees, you need an olive press to press the oil. So this is on the Mount of Olives. We always think of it as the Garden of Gethsemane. Well, that's a nice thought, but really it was an oil press where they pressed the olive oils, pressed the oil out of them. Now the lesson, if you studied it this week, it said that when Jerusalem was destroyed, they cut down all the olive trees. But guess what? They've grown back. If you go there today, you find a whole bunch of olive trees on the Mount of Olives. The wine press is the oil press is long gone, but the place where they were, it's still there. Notice Jesus says, notice how clearly he puts this. It's as if he's talking to little children. Sit here while I pray. Should be plain, right? Keep reading, please.
And he taketh with him Peter and James and John, and began to be sore amazed, and to be very heavy. And he said unto them, My soul is exceeding sorrowful unto death. Tarry ye here, and watch.
Okay, so what are his instructions to Peter, James, and John?
Stay here and watch.
Stay here and watch. Just as simple as what he said to the other disciples. Stay here and watch. Okay, now look what happens.
And he went forward a little, and fell on the ground, and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him.
Okay, it says he went a little farther. So first he leaves most of the disciples, takes Peter, James, and John a little farther with them, leaves them there, then he goes a little farther. I think I don't remember which gospel it is. Maybe it's John. Maybe it's Matthew. Maybe it's Luke. One of them says about a stone's throw farther. And we're not talking about a major league arm here. We're not talking about O'Neal Cruz and his great throwing ability. We're talking about a stone's throw. In other words, from me to Brother Epperson. That's a stone's throw. That's close enough that they can see him and maybe even hear him. But are they watching? Keep reading, please.
And he went forward a little, and fell on the ground, and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible unto thee. Take away this cup from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what thou wilt.
Now, I could talk about Abba and what it really means. I don't like what the author did here, tending to poo-poo it as a child's form of daddy, but it is. But we're not going to go into that. We don't have time for it. We're just going to leave it right there. But go ahead and read the next one.
And he cometh and findeth them sleeping, and saith unto Peter, Simon, sleepest thou? Couldest thou not watch 1 hour?
For how long?
1 hour.
1 hour. Not all night. Couldn't you watch for 1 hour? He had said, watch and pray. Stay here, watch. An hour later, they're sound asleep. Okay, keep reading.
Watch ye and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, and spoke the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again. For their eyes were heavy. Neither wist ye what to answer him. And he cometh the third time and saith unto them, Sleep on now, take your rest, it's enough. The hour is come. Behold, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise up, let us go. Lo, he that betrayeth me is at hand.
Okay, so 3 times Jesus goes back to his disciples to find them watching and praying. And 3 times he finds them doing what? Sound asleep. Snoring up a storm. Not paying attention to anything he said. Sound asleep. Why does Jesus keep coming back to them and finding them asleep? Why does he keep coming back?
He's human.
He's a human. Excellent answer. He's human enough to want some support. Watch with me just for an hour. 3 times he comes back, finds them sound asleep. Oh boy, wow. The 3rd time, he says, the hour has come. Before that, in the Gospels, several times, Jesus has said, my time has not yet come, or the hour has not yet come. But this time, for the first time, he says, the hour has come. And he knows it. He knows what's going to happen tomorrow. He knows that everything is being fulfilled that was prophesied about him. The hour has come. Thursday night, the hour has come. All right, need another reader. Thank you, Sister Coyle, for reading that. All right, this reader will read verses 43 through 52. And again, I'll stop you frequently, but anyways, who's reading? Okay.
While Jesus was still speaking to his sleepy disciples, Judas came looking for him. Behind him were men with torches, soldiers with swords, temple officials, priests, elders, and a mob carrying sticks and clubs.
Oh, boy.
Judas had told the authorities that he would find Jesus for them and give him a kiss.
Can you imagine that? Hang on a minute on that one. Judas is going to betray Jesus with a kiss. Couldn't he said the one I walked up to and shake his hand is the one? Couldn't he have said the one I walk up to and touch him on the shoulder is one? No, he says the one I kiss is the one. The symbol of affection Judas is using as the symbol of betrayal. That contrast can't escape us. A kiss of all things. Okay, please read on.
Okay. He would be the one they should arrest, the others they should let go. So as soon as Judas saw Jesus, he said, Rabbi, I finally found you. Then he drew Jesus close and kissed him on both cheeks.
Okay, now, rabbi. What does the word rabbi mean? We usually say teacher, and that's true that in the first century they used rabbi for a teacher. But the word rabbi actually means great one. Great one. Teachers were more highly respected in those days than they are today, obviously. But anyways, great one is actually what the word rabbi means. Jesus walks up to him, says, great one, and like he just read, kisses him on both cheeks. Whew. Okay, read on, please.
Okay. Immediately, the soldiers stepped forward, grabbed Jesus, and told him that he was under arrest. But when Peter saw this, he pulled out his sword from his belt and swung it at the servant of the high priest. The man quickly moved his head, but still the sword sliced off his ear.
Now,
Jesus,
it's obvious, but just to make sure we understand, was he aiming for this man's ear? No. You got it. That's what he's aiming for, the head.
yeah.
Take it off. But like you read, I like your version, it's very interesting. He turned his head, and it only took off Malchus' ear. Okay, keep reading, please.
Okay. Jesus healed the man then and said to the crowd, "Look at all your swords and clubs. You must have come out here expecting to arrest a vicious criminal. Why do you need all these weapons to arrest me? Every day this week you saw me teaching in the temple. Why didn't you arrest me then? It would have been much easier for you." But the prophecies about me must happen for the scripture to come true.
Absolutely.
Suddenly the disciples turned and ran.
How
Leaving
many?
Jesus standing
How many
alone.
did? How many ran? All of them. All of them. What about Peter, who had said, "I'll die with you"? Feet, do your thing. And they all ran. They all ran, and then something that I don't quite understand, but it's there, so we'll read it. Verses 51 and 52. This is the only place in the Bible where this tiny little story is told. We're just going to read it. Go ahead. Read the 51 and 52, please.
Okay. One of the young followers was determined to stay with Jesus. When the soldiers saw this, they reached out and grabbed him. But that night he wore only a tunic. When they took hold of his garment, he twisted out of it and ran home half naked.
Well, there you go. Don't even know who it was. Some have suggested possibly this was Mark himself. It says a young man. Mark was younger than the disciples. Possibly it was. We don't know. That's all that's said about this story. The Bible never explains it. This is the only place this little story happens. Anyways, he runs home naked, or like he says, nearly naked. Probably he had on underwear underneath the tunic, so he ran away in his underwear. Now, in the lesson on, was it Wednesday? Yeah. Last sentence on the page, it says, the young man, instead of leaving all to follow Jesus, leaves all to flee from Jesus. Interesting, interesting. Okay, thank you. Need another reader now. And this will be verses 53 through 65.
Bill, it's kind of interesting, though. His disciples take off running at a moment.
Yep.
This kid tries to stick around.
At least we give him credit for that.
When I heard it again, it dawned on me, wait a minute. The ones that are supposed to be with him, they bolt.
And this one young kid.
One young kid, like, no, I'm going to stick with you. And then all of a sudden gets grabbed and, okay, maybe this isn't the right way to go.
Interesting little story. Can't make any more comments on it because that's all I know about it. All right, somebody read 53 through 65, please.
They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, elders, and teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest.
Okay, so Peter had fled, but now he's hanging around to see what's going to happen at a distance. Go ahead.
There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree.
Now, if you've ever been a court of law, when nothing agrees with anything else, how good is it? You're not going to have a case. That's just all there is to it. Keep going, please.
Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this man-made temple, and in 3 days will build another, not made by man. Yet even then their testimony did not agree.
Now, Jesus had said that. They had taken it out of context, but he had said that. But they can't even agree on that. So this is worthless too. Keep going.
Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer.
Remember Isaiah 53? Led as a lamb before the shearers. He's dumb. That was fulfilled with Jesus. He doesn't say a thing in his own defense, in his own behalf. He certainly could have. He certainly could have. But he chose not to. Now listen to what happens next.
Again, the high priest asked him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?
And one of the Gospels, I don't remember which one it is, one of the Gospels, I think it's John, he actually says, I command you in the name of God to answer this question. That is an oath. And Jesus is going to fulfill an oath made before his Father. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And you're under oath now. Look at what Jesus says.
I am, said Jesus, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven.
That's a quotation from the book of Daniel. But Jesus' simple answer is, I am. You've asked me if I'm the Christ? I am. Wow. Look at what happens next, the next sentence.
The high priest tore his clothes.
Now, that was something that was done commonly in the time of Jesus. In the case of extreme grief or extreme outrage, something extreme happens, people were known to tear their clothes. However, it was a law that the high priest was never allowed to tear his robe. Here, the high priest tore his robe, disqualifying him instantly from being high priest. Nobody even mentions that. Keep reading, please.
Why do we need any more witnesses, he asked. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, Prophesy. And the guards took him and beat him.
Have you ever had somebody spit at you? Can you imagine anything grosser? I see you nodding your head, Ted. Can you imagine anything grosser than to have somebody spit in your face? And that was minor compared with the rest of the things they did. They blindfolded him, punched him with their fists, said, Prophesy, tell me my name that just hit you in your face. The guards took him out and beat him. Okay, need another reader. This will be our last reader of the day. And you'll finish the chapter, whoever does the reading. You'll start with verse 66 and finish the chapter. Thank you, Matt.
Well, before I read, there's one thing I've always wondered in the Gospels, and this is, my thinking process. If Jesus' death on the cross and everything was the will of God, and everything that happened to him was the will of God for it to happen, I've often wondered, how could Judas have sinned so greatly if
He's
he was
fulfilling
following
God's
the will
word.
of God? That's one thing, and nobody's ever been able to answer that for me.
Well, as Jesus himself said, the Son of Man is going to be crucified, but woe to that man that causes it, meaning Judas. So even Jesus could see that even though, yes, Jesus was bound for the cross, shame on Judas for the part he played in it. Okay, please, 66 onward.
Now, as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of these servant girls of the high priest came, and when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You were with Jesus of Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you are saying." And he went out onto the porch. And
Okay, now remember, Peter, the girl says, "This is one of them," or "You also were with him." He says, "No, I wasn't. I don't know what you're talking about." Keep reading.
And the servant girl saw him again and began to say to those who stood by, "This is one of them." But he denied it again. And a little later, those who stood by said to Peter again, "Surely you're one of them, for you are a Galilean, and your speech shows it." Then he began to cuss and swear, "I do not know this man whom you speak."
Oh, boy.
A second time the rooster crowed. Then Peter called to mind the word that Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times."
Hold up. When that second rooster started crowing, that must have gone off like an alarm clock inside Judas' brain. Jesus had said, "Before the rooster crows twice, you're going to deny me 3 times. The rooster crows a second time, and Peter suddenly realizes 3 times he's denied Jesus. And the third time, he's done it with cursing and swearing. You think my speech is good? Well, listen to me cuss. And somewhere in there, Peter looks at Jesus. Jesus looks at Peter. Not a word needs to be spoken. Those foul words are still on Peter's lips as he thinks what he's just done. And then the last sentence, let me read it. And he broke down and wept. Why is Peter crying?
Because he knew that he failed. He failed himself as much as he failed the man that he dedicated years of his life to.
And Peter suddenly realized that Jesus knew Peter better than Peter knew Peter. What about us? Jesus knows us better than we know ourselves. Whoa.
In Friday's lesson, at the end, I mentioned to you about these questions.
Yes.
I used to always say, thank God for the story of David, because it gave me hope that in my atrocities in my life, I still have the ability to be maybe considered the apple of God's eye. But this week's lesson was emotionally, I don't have words, because I realized I've always used to say I'm like Peter, because I'm ready to grab the sword and let's fight. I mean, even now in my disparaging abilities, I would have taken the sword, and that would have been my mentality. But the bottom question, number 5.
Okay.
Though Peter greatly failed Jesus with his denials, Jesus did not cast him off. What hope can you take for yourself from this fact? That even though I am Peter-like and have taken myself away from the church and from God at times, God has not taken me away from him. I'm always accepted by God, regardless of how filthy I may be.
Yep. Yep. So you're the only one in here like Peter. I have a feeling we all have some Peter in us at times at least. Okay, comments, anything online, anything? I have one over here, Brother Ted, while Rita looks up, see if anybody's online saying anything.
You can prepare and train for a crisis, but when you're actually in it, you really have to have strong leadership to endure it. You don't know how you're going to react. During Desert Storm, mistakes were made on board the ship. We train,
Yeah,
go to general quarters all the time and train. But when we actually had to do it, mistakes were actually made. Fortunately, none were serious, and we don't know how we will react at the end times when they come.
you're right. You're absolutely right.
We can only prepare and train and pray.
Yeah. And you're right. And you can speak from experience, having been in the Navy, and you know how all the military, including the Navy, is so careful to instruct as to how you're supposed to do things. And how many times did they go through it? Only once? Over and over again. And when the crisis comes, somebody's going to mess up. Hopefully not seriously, but people are going to mess up.
I can attest to the Navy drills. I remember them, the often wild moments going, okay, how's this going to work? But I was thinking about the question about Judas a moment ago, and you know, it could have been any of the 12. It really didn't have to be Judas.
No?
And it likens to the idea that Judas began to separate himself for the love of money or the love of self, and that was the separation.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything in particular. It wasn't necessarily God's will that it was Judas. It was Judas's will
Choice.
to want something for himself. So our selfish nature is, I think, where this all comes from. It's not because the will of God, I don't think, was being had anything to do with Judas himself specific, because again, it could have been any of the 12.
Could have been any of them.
Right? It was our individual walk. Were we asking for it to be the will of God?
Right.
Or were we one of us redirecting? So
Well, you know, we have this time in Judas' life when he messed up badly and betrayed Jesus. And that's serious. But how many times did Big Mouth Peter mess up during his ministry? Over and over and over and over again. Yeah. But I like your point. Despite the mess-ups, Jesus doesn't give up on them. Anybody online? Nobody online at all. Aren't you glad that they came, so now you're not all alone on this side of the congregation? Any other comments? Okay, let's have a word of prayer and close our Sabbath School study. Father in heaven, thank you for this time we've had to again study your word. Important verses that we've looked at today, an important chapter, important events. And it's so easy to see ourselves here in place of Peter or even Judas. Horror thought. But sometimes we find ourselves like them. Lord, forgive us for our sins. Keep us faithful to you. And one day we look forward to being with you forever. In Jesus' name, amen.